The minimalist ethic basically says we really don't need to be concerned at all about principles for how to interact with the world. It's just there, and we use it. We don't have to think about it any more than we have to think about the ethics of walking on a sidewalk. Unfortunately, this can lead to the situation Wallace Stegner describes when he said, "It's never been man's gift to make a wilderness, but he can make deserts, and has." Non-cognitivists generally have minimalist ethics. Why? Well, because they reduce everything to emotivism or prescriptivism. So maybe if DeWeese loves the Rocky Mountains, he's going to emote about the Rocky Mountains, how beautiful they are. Maybe you hate the mountains and you love the coast. I'm not a beach person. I could care less about the beach. So I'm not emotional about the beach. You are. But since we all have different emotional responses to different settings, the non-cognitivists are going to say that this gives us no basis at all for making environmental ethical claims. You see how that works, okay? Similarly for prescriptivism. I can tell you it's wrong to pollute. You ought to recycle. And you say, who are you to tell me that? I don't want to. You can't make me. And you're right, I can't. So the non-cognitivist says prescriptivism won't work either. So there can be no robust environmental ethic. Well, let me say one more thing here. An example of this, I've got a quote here. William James, turn of the 20th century American philosopher and writer, said this: visible nature is all plasticity and indifference, a moral multiverse. It is not a moral universe. To such a harlot we owe no allegiance. With her as a whole we can establish no moral communion. Don't you love how James writes? I mean, tell me where you stand, really. And we are free in our dealings with her several parts to obey or to destroy, and to follow no law but that of prudence in coming to terms with such of her particular features as will help us to our own private ends. So whatever works for us is moral. Other than that, doesn't matter. That's what William James would say. Subjectivism. Well, if you're a subjectivist, then what makes your moral claims true is the opinion of a group, a society, a culture, or your own. So if you care about environmentalism, then of course you're going to want to join the Sierra Club, the Evangelical Environmental Network, maybe Earth First. If you don't care about the environment, you're going to object to all of that and oppose it. But it's all subjective. So there could be no robust environmental ethic if you're a subjectivist about ethics. If you're an objectivist, well, you can be an ethical egoist and say, well, I'm going to do everything I can to keep people from polluting the mountains because I love the mountains and it's in my interest that the mountains remain pristine. So, or if you're a surfer, you're going to do everything you can to try to get people from throwing trash in that will wash down after a storm and pollute the beaches so you can't surf for 2 or 3 days after any rainstorm. But that's just in your own self-interest. But obviously that's not a good basis for any kind of a robust environmental ethic. Objectivism is going to give us something to say about it that would apply to all people because it's objective. But still people can object. People who would fall into this minimalist camp. For example, you could argue that environmentalism is politically motivated. Calvin Beisner, a Christian writer, says in his book Prospects for Growth, a biblical view of pollution, resources, and the future, he says most evangelical concerns are ideologically influenced hysteria. So he's putting everything off as politically influenced, and he winds up with a not no ethic, but a very minimalist ethic. Or you can say nature only has instrumental value. Charles Krauthammer, whom you may know is a frequent Sunday morning contributor to these TV shows or columnist in the Washington Post, said clearly not everything with an environmental claim is worth doing. How to choose? There is a simple way. Call it the fundamental axiom of environmentalism. Combating ecological change that directly threatens the health and safety of people is an environmental necessity. All else is luxury. Well, that's not no ethic, is it? And it's certainly commendable that we ought to combat any kind of environmental change that threatens health and safety. But do we want to say more than that? Do we want to say that all else is luxury? This is reducing environmentalism to human value, only what's good for us. Others say it's impossible to ground environmental rights and duties. Now, I have an odd view here among philosophers. Some people share my view. I have a very hard time making sense of the notion of rights, except in two areas. I can make sense of political rights, which are granted by a legitimate government, and I can make sense of rights given by God, divine rights, the kinds of things we would call a fundamental human right. But beyond that, I have difficulty making sense of rights. Rather, I can make sense of duties. And a right is the flip side of a duty. And I can make sense of duties that I have to people. Duties, although ultimately I will disagree, but I might say I have a duty to my dog. If I've adopted my dog from the shelter, I have a duty to provide food, water, and so on for my dog. I can make sense of that. So the flip side would be to say, well, then my dog has a certain right, a claim against me. He's a right to be taken care of by me. I can make sense of rights only as the flip side of duties. However, we need to ask the question, do non-human animals have rights? Do we have duties to non-human animals? Do we have duties in the way that would actually give them a right? Do we have duties to plants, to amoebas? Do we have duties to ecosystems? Do we have duties to species? Do we have duties to future generations? It's very difficult to make sense out of the notion that something that doesn't exist actually has a property. And for something to have a right is to say that it has a moral property. But future generations don't exist, so how can they have moral properties? It'd be like saying, well, imagine a world in which Santa Claus is real. Well, then you would have a duty not to be nasty, but to be nice, to leave cookies out. But how do you transfer that to the real world? It's imaginary. He can't have duties. We can't have duties to an imaginary thing. So it's very difficult to make sense out of grounding rights and duties to non-existent entities like future generations, or to entire ecosystems, or to entire species. And so some people say, well, there can't be any robust environmental ethic because of this difficulty of grounding the notion of rights and duties. And finally, this is what I call theistic passivism, not pacifism, not a view about the use of violence, but passivism. Here's an analogy. You probably know as well as I do that there are smokers who say, I know I should quit, but by the time I get cancer, they'll have found a cure. It's not going to catch up with me. They'll be able to cure by the time I get it, right? We've all met people like that, I'm sure. There are Christians who have a similar attitude. They say, well, yeah, maybe we're polluting, maybe we're destroying the ozone layer, maybe, although actually we've done a lot to help the ozone layer recover, actually, since we banned chlorofluorocarbons, but maybe we're putting too much CO2 in the atmosphere, maybe global warming is true, but we'll figure out a way to take care of it before it starts killing people. God's not going to let the environment get so bad that it's really going to have a bad effect on people. Have you heard that? Maybe some of you think that way. Let me suggest this to you. How many of you think that it's possible to die as Christians with a view of God as sovereign, do you believe that it's possible to die before your time? I think most of you would say, no. No one dies before your time if God is sovereign. Say, okay, good. Wouldn't it be great if you could give a whole lot more money to missions, a whole lot more money to disaster relief in Japan? Here's how you do it. Stop eating. Just don't eat. You're not going to die before your time. You know, God is sovereign. He's not going to let you die before your time, so just stop eating. Well, obviously there's something wrong with that, isn't it? Because we do have responsibilities that go along with God's sovereignty. Yes, God is sovereign, but He has put in place a system of physical cause and effect. Now, it's certainly possible that God could sustain a human being in life who didn't eat. That would be a miracle, but that's possible. Do we expect that God's going to do that just so we can give more money to missions? Probably not. We don't presume on that kind of miracle. Similarly, when we look at the environment, if it is true that we are doing things that damage the environment, it seems that we are ignoring our responsibilities if we say, well, God's not going to let it get. Well, maybe He will. We have no guarantees there. So I'm not sure the theological minimalist view, the theological passivist view, is the appropriate way to go. Now, this is not to say that people that fall into any of these categories may not themselves be very responsible in their care of creation. They may drive Priuses and recycle. They may wear recycled jeans and bamboo underwear. They may be very environmentally conscious personally, but none of these views give a basis for developing a robust environmental ethic, or so I claim. So I think this minimalist approach is substandard, and I don't think it's biblically warranted. Okay? Now, I'll take some questions, and then we'll take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll continue. So any questions about this minimalist approach? Actually, my major arguments against this are not going to be what's wrong with this view, but I hope tomorrow when I present the positive case for a theocentric environmental ethic, that the wondrous splendor of that view will so capture you, you'll say, yeah, I see that that's biblically based, that's theologically accurate, that's action guiding. The best response to this is to present a positive biblical theology of creation care.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.